Welcome to PipeGen Live, you guys. We're going to get started. So the topic today is moving up market and breaking into large enterprise logos. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. The way today is going to work is I have a great panel that I'll introduce everyone here to in a little bit. For 30, 40 minutes of the show today, what we're going to do is jam on that topic with people that have actually done it and are in the middle of doing it right now. And then we'll peel off and have a one-on-one interview around the topic here in a little bit. So before we dig in, and we're just going to get straight to the tactics here, I want to give a quick shout out to our two sponsors, Orum. It's one of my favorite tools. I mean, cold calling, we're kind of in an age right now where if you can't get people on the phone, it's almost not worth doing at this point. And Orum helps not only get a higher percentage of people on the phone, but will literally help you have like one conversation per hour to like 6 or 7. So imagine the productivity gain there. So go check out Orum if you're interested in that. And then ZoomInfo, it's like, where do you start? They kind of do everything, nowadays. But one of the things I love about ZoomInfo is you guys are pumping out so much great content with your GTM team around like how people use ZoomInfo, how you guys are using ZoomInfo. I think you guys are really big in the AI space right now and actually having stuff that actually helps sellers versus being like really fancy sounding and that sort of stuff. So go make sure to check out ZoomInfo and what they're doing. So today, what we want to dig into is this concept of moving up market. I think for a lot of you, let us know in the chat, give us a yes or a no. Are you selling enterprise deals against what feels like a David and Goliath type of situation? Are you selling against a really large competitor or someone that is like well established in the space? Let us know in the chat, yes or no. Does that situation apply to you? And hopefully what you'll see from this is if that situation applies to you, you're definitely not alone. Yeah, we got a bunch of people in that situation. So what we're going to dig into today is kind of 4 buckets. We're going to talk about what's the difference in approach from a sales standpoint of moving from mid-market into enterprise and doing true enterprise sales and an enterprise sales motion. We're going to talk about common mistakes when selecting accounts. We're going to talk about how to scale up your messaging, which I think a really big mistake oftentimes I'll see as I focus a lot on that outbound piece is talking features and functions to C-suite executives. Like they just don't care about what the tool does. And then we'll talk about how to sell the suite of products and how to really get into a good land and expand type of motion. So as I'm introducing our speakers today real quick, let us know in the chat if you got questions. Feel free to drop it in the chat or the Q&A. We want to make today as interactive as possible. We got Rona Cohen. She's a senior strat account manager of enterprise sales at ZoomInfo, has like 13 plus years of sales experience, done a lot of enterprise sales. Tory Speer is on the call, a regional sales director of enterprise at ZoomInfo, 3-time President's Club winner, bunch of sales experience that Tory has. Colin Specter, who's been a previous guest on the show many times. He's built enterprise sales motions from scratch. They're doing it at Orum right now. He's done it in a bunch of previous companies as well. We got Armand, decade plus of sales experience, previous VP of sales at Pave, just came out with his book, had to grab it off the floor. Cold Calling Sucks. Make sure to go grab it. Armand, feel free to drop a link in there in the chat. This is the best book on cold calling, by the way. So we'll give you, I wasn't planning on doing that today, Armand, but
I was expecting it.
Let people know where they can get it. And if you're coming across our stuff at Outbound Squad for the first time, we provide sales training to some of the largest software companies in the world, primarily around outbound and then AEs, kind of sales skill training. So without further ado, let's get into it, you guys. I feel like that was a mouthful just to like introduce the topic today. I'm excited to get to this. So I want to talk about approach. One of the things that, Rona, just to kind of kick the first question off your way, is let's talk about the difference in approach of, hey, I've been doing the mid-market thing. We're about to move into enterprise, or we're doing enterprise. We can't treat that sales motion in the same way. And one of the things that you had mentioned when we were prepping for this is that there's a difference between sending cold outreach into an enterprise logo versus running like an enterprise sales motion. So can you talk about the difference in approach? And feel free to elaborate. And you guys are going through this at ZoomInfo here in the last couple of years, but what's the difference in approach?
Absolutely. So I think this is something that every seller kind of struggles with, right? As they're progressing in their career, they're used to a high volume game. The more dials I make, the more people I get in front of. And all of a sudden you're transitioning into this space where I mean, these are, $54 billion companies that are comprised of thousands of people, so many different stakeholders. I mean, you have to completely rewire your mentality where now you need to come on not as a salesperson or a seller, but all of a sudden now you're transitioning into this consultant. And I would say like the number one thing as you move into this motion is thinking about no longer going in like product focused, but really digging into like outcome based results and like working a lot on doing due diligence in completely understanding that enterprise company that you're actually getting in front of prior to even doing any of that outreach, right? So now your brain is like doing all of this, like background, educating yourself on how it is, like the organization is structured, digging into their 10 Qs, their 10 Ks, if they're a publicly traded company, their earnings call. You are literally trying to become an extension of that enterprise. And only then is it when you can start working through the strategy so that when you are having the outreach conversations and when you're getting in front of senior level execs, right? All of a sudden you're speaking to their day-to-day motions, speaking to their struggles, their obstacles, their challenges, and it resonates. It's no longer, hey, I have this product for you. I'm reaching out and having my SDR set a call so I can walk through this demo. So it's a struggle transitioning into that headspace, but like that is how you start penetrating in a way that it actually is going to like stick, especially when there's so many other solutions out there. It's such a competitive landscape. How is it that you make sure that your conversation lands and you get that call and you get that in, ahead of whoever else might be there trying to get the set as well? I mean, we could honestly spend like hours into how it is you have to transition from, mid-market SMB into an enterprise type of headspace, but it's definitely, it's not going to happen overnight. And you kind of have to give yourself the grace. Like you're not going to churn and burn deals anymore, like on a monthly basis. Like this is a nurture situation. You want to be like primed if tomorrow your top enterprise customer reaches out to you and says, I want to hire you because you have this like fundamental knowledge, you're an extension of our team. That is the type of approach that you need to continue to like replicate across all of the different enterprise logos that you're trying to break into, because it'll, it builds rapport, it builds credibility. It's, you're coming from a place of actual concern for the business being better and you being able to help provide that solution. So
it's this trusted advisor thing that we hear about a lot in sales, right? Be the consultant, be the trusted advisor. If we could, before kind of moving on to the next parts, and again, for those of you watching, we're going to talk tactically around like, okay, how do we like approach targeting within an account? How do we choose accounts? Like, what do we say to folks from a messaging standpoint? We're going to talk about all that stuff. But I want to give some tactical stuff to the audience. Like, how do you become a consultative seller? How do you become a trusted advisor? I think it's like really easy to talk about that. And then it's like kind of hard to figure out like what exactly does that mean and how do I become that? Just for the rest of the team here, what would you add in terms of if I'm a rep and I'm looking to really be a resource for my prospects, like what's something tactical that I could do to advance to that? Go ahead, Armand.
So when I think about sales, there are three big buckets. There's prospecting, discovery, and process. And you have an opportunity to run things differently in enterprise in any one of those three buckets. When I think about being an advisor, that oftentimes happens in the discovery bucket. And one of the things that's critical about enterprise sales is the power of getting to power is 10-fold, 20-fold, 30-fold more important. You can spend 6 months having no idea where you stand inside of a deal because you're working with the wrong person. And so when you get the opportunity to work with an executive, you usually get one shot to demonstrate your ability to come off as an advisor. And so one of the things that I learned from Ian Cognac, who is the #1 all-time producer at Salesforce, is what's called yo-yo selling. So if you get the chance to meet with an executive, you usually want to get a sense of the top business priorities that they're focused on, right? A, B, and C. And you want to shed light on how other similar peer businesses might have been solving those business priorities. But the problem is if you get down to the feature functionality level, they actually don't even know what's going on below the fold of their business because they're trying to stay above a 100,000 employee organization. And so one of the ways that you can be an advisor is you can demonstrate industry expertise at the top by understanding their business priorities, by telling patterns of how you've seen other similar large companies solve those business priorities, but then going on a mission with their team. And so the yo-yo selling is you start at the top, you get the business priorities, and then you ask for introductions to the department leads to figure out what's actually going on in their business. Why tactically can't they achieve these business priorities? So for example, if someone's really, really struggling to get across that they want their brand to be perceived as enterprise ready, you're going to go and meet with the different department leads in CS to figure out what's happening, in sales, what's happening. You're going to meet with the marketing team to figure out what's happening. And then you're going to go back to that CEO and you're going to deliver insight on their own business while also pattern matching that to other businesses. And that is how you can come off as a peer. You can educate them on both their own business, but also on what other peers like them are doing as well.
So I want to quickly comment on that. I went through this, like, as our business has grown, like 3 or 4 years ago, I started to sell to VPs of sales that would have hundreds of reps on their team versus like a dozen. And the first conversation I had, this VP didn't want to know anything about the content that was going to be covered in the training. Like, and that's normally what I would talk about. Hey, how do you approach cold email, Jason? Like, what should my, you know what I'm saying? And what you mentioned, I think, is so critical of when you show up to a call with an executive, the best way to start that call is to share an understanding of what you believe their priorities are. So hopefully you've either dug that out in your research or talked to someone on their team. Anytime I have a meeting coming up with an exec I haven't met before, I always reach out to have a one-on-one with my champion, someone at the org, even if I'm just like reaching out to reps, honestly, just to get a better sense of what's going on. The second thing you mentioned, I think, is super important. Like, the insight in the customer story is so big. Like, I interviewed Henry Schack, your guys' CEO, Rona and Tory, on a podcast, and he said the number one thing that he wants to get away if he's on a sales call, like being sold to, he's like, teach me something I can like take back to my team. Like, share an insight. Well, like, who is doing what peer of mine is doing something in a world-class way that I can deliver an insight to my team. And it's like such a simple thing, but that, to me, I feel like takes all the pressure off of meeting with that exec. If you show up really prepared with a story to share and an insight from one of their peers and give them something tangible on that call. What else would you, go ahead, Armand.
I was just going to add one more thing on that, which is that's, again, you're understanding their priorities, you're giving the peer stories, you're teaching them something, but you're not deal fatiguing them. You're not bringing them into the content of, here's how I structure an outbound sequence. And I've seen a lot of reps transitioning from mid-market to enterprise where they'll go through a 30-minute discovery call. They're doing okay in the discovery call, and they try to set a 60-minute demo with a CMO. And it's like, they do not need to see the 60-minute demo. Their team needs to sign off on the 60-minute demo, and you need to deliver the results in the executive summary back to the top.
Yeah. I was just going to say that we all think that enterprise strategic space, like all these companies have it figured out, but they don't. So like, that's what they equally need, that knowledge sharing, because they're constantly trying to figure out how to make their own go-to-market strategy and their motion, like, and execute to all of the different things that either, if they're publicly traded, their board is holding them to from revenue growth perspective. So we, I think, kind of not idolize, but we look at them as like, oh, these are the logos that are so, primed. They have to have it all figured out. It's all squared away for them. They know exactly how it is that they're going about running their business. And 9 out of 10 times, it's like a constant, they're redoing strategy this quarter and the next quarter and the new fiscal, and they're kicking off like a whole new vision. And being able to share what those other enterprises are doing, even better if you know exactly the ones that they're directly competing with. So like some of their top competitors in the space, and like dropping those names, like in a friendly way, right? Not in a, you need to be up against them. I think anything that they can then replicate, or you can be able to show like has successfully worked for other competitors or companies or whatever, it's always you hear them, like you almost see their light kind of go on in their face being like, keep digging into that, or that's maybe where your conversation spirals. And then you let them kind of go off into their whole, they'll share all of their different use case. I mean, it'll open up a door to a much larger conversation of where the actual struggles are for them.
So,
yeah, one thing.
Go ahead, Tory.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to add, because I like Armand, your buckets, and you covered a lot in discovery. And I think one thing I just want to add from the process standpoint, when you talked about, Jason, enterprise logo versus enterprise deal. One exercise that we did internally at ZoomInfo, we're only about a 3,500 person company, is, hey, we want to buy something for the sales team. Like, who would you even bring in? And it was amazing how many reps had no idea who on like the rev ops team, the sales ops team, like no one even internally knew how somebody externally would sell internally to ZoomInfo, a sales tool. And I think it's a good reminder for us that your customers, to your point, Rona, they're figuring out their go-to-market. A lot of them don't even know their own procurement processes. And so it's important for us to be the conduit between all of these different teams and almost learn, hey, how is their process? Who else does need to be involved? And do that multi-threading, not only from a discovery standpoint, but even just from a process standpoint of who is involved in all of this, and like get close with their procurement teams. These are things in enterprise that you just have to get really good at, that you may be able to get away from in SMB and mid-market when just a VP of sales or whatever can sign off. It's not that way in enterprise. And so that's how you do an enterprise deal versus just capturing a small, footprint within an enterprise logo. So I just wanted to add that from a process standpoint of something we did internally that was a really big takeaway and eye-opening for me as a manager when I thought about how we would buy a product, and I had no idea how we would even do that internally at ZoomInfo.
Yeah, I mean, Tory, to that point, right? As you evolve up market, you start to expand your internal sales language, right? If you think about every sales team has a language framework. Really popular one out there is MEDDIC, for example. In the enterprise, you may add additional letters. For example, MEDDPIC, the P standing for paper process, because that procurement and paper process is its own deep rabbit hole, for lack of a better term, in many of these large enterprises. You want to ensure you're uncovering that. We added a letter for F for financing and funding and understanding where exactly the financing is coming from. As an example, upmarket, it's important to know how things are budgeted. And to the point that Rona was making, I mean, you're really a facilitator in the enterprise, right? You're oftentimes you're in the room facilitating all of the stakeholders having their own internal conversations to get more alignment. Like all of these large corporations, they've all scaled to this level because of typically alignment around OKRs or key corporate initiatives. And so they're all personally motivated to solve these big business initiatives. And I think the challenge to you as like an enterprise rep is being that facilitator, helping each of them figure out what each of their personal wins are as it relates to that key corporate initiative, because that's the fastest way those folks get promoted in these large enterprises. And so they have a lot of personal motivation to want to solve those initiatives that are set at the board level or the executive level. So your goal is really to find out, who's got the most skin in the game and is sizzling to solve those initiatives and believes your solution's uniquely qualified to do so, and get others, bought in on that and rallying around that. So we run workshops in enterprise versus mid-market. You're doing much more like consensus call and kind of pilot scoping calls. It's just a bit of a different approach there.
So we need to be more consultative. I love this idea, Tory, that you had shared around. And this doesn't have to be just selling to sales. It could be, hey, your HR department. If you sell an HR solution, how does your HR department buy stuff? Like just making sure that you and your reps understand that process internally, I think is really big. One thing that I want to go back to is this idea that the power of getting to power is 10 times, it's 10 times in enterprise what it is in mid-market. So a lot of this is having a really great champion. So the next kind of area that I want to dig into with you guys is this idea of like right account, right contact, right champion, et cetera. How do you guys think of, and I'll kick this question your way, Armand, about champions in terms of, I think with these enterprise deals, how do I know if this is a true champion or not? And how do I think about the influence that this person has in Medic, they talk a lot about coach versus champion. But I'm curious in terms of like champion and building a true champion, how do you think about that part of knowing whether or not that you have an actual champion?
So there's the people who can't or the people who won't. So let's start with the people who won't. The people who won't are the ones who won't get you to the next person in the sales cycle. They won't work with you to build a business case. They won't start shopping you around the organizations. And that's like really, really important to me to be able to figure out is like, is this person going to try to literally be the champion alone, which is not an actual champion, or are they actually going to champion me around the organization? So that's one thing in terms of the tasks that I would like them to do. And usually there's a certain level of seniority. For 30 MPC, it actually ends up looking something like this, where our common champions are the head of demand gen, the head of content, or sometimes a head of product marketing. And it's usually a head of or a director of, or sometimes a VP of in these bigger deals where you're typically looking for that champion. But then the other piece is sometimes these folks actually can't do those things. So even if someone like could try to make an introduction from the head of demand gen to the head of content, if I'm asking the head of demand gen or the head of content a bunch of questions that it's really clear they don't know the answer to, I might start to get the sense that they're actually not politically sophisticated enough to be my champion, because everyone knows that one person on your team where when they bring up an idea, even if it was a good idea, you're like, I'm not listening to that guy, right? And so when that happens, you actually need to keep prospecting the rest of the account as well, because you need to have individual relationships with each of these people and not rely on that person to be the person who's sharing your reputation with the other rest of the organization, because they don't have a good reputation on their own. So I think of it again in the buckets of like, they won't do it, meaning they won't take the steps with me, but also they can't do it. Do they have enough political clout in the organization to actually get it done?
So Tory, I want to kick this question your way around, like what comes to mind for me with this is like influencer mapping. So what does that look like on the enterprise level with, let's talk maybe even before you've even gotten a meeting within the account. How do you guys think about like the account mapping and thinking about who those influencers and mobilizers and champions like might be within that account? And then the second part of that would be like, how often do you review that with your reps, like throughout a sales cycle? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think to the influencer, there's sort of two ways that I would think about it. One is your ideal customer profile of like who is our normal buyer, who is our normal champion, kind of like you said, Armand, right? What are those titles usually like, and do those exist in this account? That's probably the easiest sort of thing to start mapping and saying, okay, do we have, access to these people? Have they already been in conversation? But I think actually, and this ties back to a little bit of your power comment, Armand, a play that we run a lot at ZoomInfo is we have 35,000 customers. So I guarantee somebody in that organization has probably used ZoomInfo before. So a big part of our mapping is, did they come from a previous customer? Did that customer spend a lot of money? Were they an influencer in that conversation already? Do they have connections to, our VPs, our C-levels, whoever it is? And so that is a huge, especially in enterprise, those referrals, the networking, getting to power quickly, especially knowing we have a good brand that has a lot of customers. The influencer mapping really starts there for me and my team is, great, did we look through ZoomInfo? Did we look through LinkedIn? Have we looked at mapping? Let's get all of these people down and see where the best place to start is if we already have a champion from a previous company that's moved over here with some contact tracking and those sort of things. So that for me is kind of a hack and a great way that we've gotten into a lot of customers at a starting point, leveraging those relationships that already exist from previous customers.
Yeah, it's like that's the hardest part, I feel like, in some of these enterprise deals is just breaking through and making contact with someone, because if it's a really big logo, like a Fortune 500, everyone wants to get meetings with these folks. So I think a pro tip there is a pretty basic thing that I find a lot of people don't do is, have you reversed engineered how do your best deals come together?
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you know, like, what does Armand calls it the golden path, right? Like, what is that golden path in a deal? And generally what folks should be involved in, like that informs your efforts throughout the deal when you're multi-threading. Colin because again, you guys are going through this right now at Orum and making this transition. How do you think about like when the actual deals are working and you're working with like the frontline leader and they're working with the rep? What part of those deal reviews and coaching comes up that's around like multi-threading and how to think about the champions and like who's involved and what kind of contact you're having with them and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, no, great question. You got to map out the account as best you can. And I guess trying to answer one of the questions in the chat with this question, Jax asked, like, what do you do when you're just starting out? I think Rona shared it in the beginning. You research the account, right? Research the account that you want to go after. These enterprises, by and large, have public filings. They're sharing investor relations reports. You can get a good insight into what their strategic initiatives are. And what's interesting, what we found in a lot of these large enterprises, and I'm sure the others can relate, you start to get some interesting job titles that are like specific to the initiative. For example, like someone might be like Chief Digital Transformation Officer, and somebody might be sales, AI sales performance manager. And so there are these kind of frontline people that these jobs have been created to help tackle these strategic initiatives, because again, we're talking about billions of dollars in revenue that these businesses are focused on, that they're creating jobs. And Harvard Business Review did a big study a number of years ago, like what is the fastest way to get elevated at a large company? If you work for a large company in the audience, you probably realize this. It's attaching yourselves to the large corporate initiatives and solving those initiatives. So they are very much motivated to solve them. In fact, many of them carry titles around solving them. And so your job is to figure out what are those initiatives, who are the folks most keenly excited about solving them. And I think LinkedIn is, I keep it really simple. We do a lot of research on LinkedIn. For org chart mapping, we use a free tool. They may charge for it now. We were like an early customer, but it's called 100 Handshakes. And so we have like images literally of the people. In the beginning, we used like a Miro board. Now we have a tool where you can put the profile of each of the people on an org chart view, and then you can start to mark them. Are they green in favor of us? Are they unknown? Are they red? Are they an anti-champion? Are they detractor? And so we wanted to get a sense of the who's who in the zoo at the account. How are each of the people related to us as a potential solution to the initiative? And just as a rep, like you really want to train on up and down the org chart, like how your solution impacts the executives, upper management, middle management, frontline management, and then of course the reps. And I think that's a big change from mid-market. It was brought up before. You could do a demo on how many calls and the connect rates to like a VP of sales at a mid-market company, but a CRO at a large enterprise, they're going to want to hear about cultural transformation and sales effectiveness and efficiency and velocity and time to monetization. And so those are some of the nuances there and way to think about it and change there.
I was just going to say, because I know there was some chatter in like the actual chat about net new, you're breaking into enterprise. Like, what do you do? Take the volume game from when you were in mid-market, move it into enterprise in your beginning 3 to 6 months where you are taking all calls. You are taking individual contributors at that company. You are taking whatever title. You are trying to have as many conversations at that enterprise logo, not title specific, because you are going to learn. And then it goes back to like the gaining the knowledge, like on the inner workings. You're going to understand through the IC conversations what the reps are struggling with, like what is preventing them from hitting quota. You're going to get names and titles. You're going to get who they report into, and then who does that person report into. It is the multi-threading dream. So like when I started in Strat at ZoomInfo, we're like building up the team and we're trying to figure out like the different strategies. And I had this large oil company and it was like all these subsidiaries. And I'm just like, I don't even know where to start. But to be honest with you, I don't even have a good ZoomInfo pitch at this point. Like I sound terrible. So I'm going to do literally like 6 to 10 calls a day, take them with anybody that I can get on the phone with. If you have an SDR, that's great. You can strategize in terms of call campaigns. I did it myself. Like I come from like an old school sales background where we went and prospected and called and did everything on our own. So I would find connections on LinkedIn. I would have these conversations where I would pivot my in as I'm trying to learn about this space or this vertical or your company, having absolutely nothing to do with maybe like even ZoomInfo, but that is how you're going to break in, right? Like you're going to take all those calls, you're going to have all these conversations, and you're going to take all the little pieces of knowledge. And then all of a sudden you have a full baked story to come to a VP and say, hey, by the way, your portfolio sellers that now you have this motion of, they have to sell 300 solutions versus their one, they don't know where to start. They don't know what product they should be selling, who they should be selling to, why they should be selling. Like, what are you guys doing to help support them, with X, or like having that. So, and you also start picking up on their lingo too, right? And I think that's also like the way that I've found to build fast rapport and fast credibility is like, I know how it is that they're referencing each other internally. I know how it is that they're referencing, what we might call an account manager, they call something else. What we might call a solution specialist, they call something else. Like, lingo and all of the little nuances, like that is what, like, sales 101, right? Like, take that volume, apply it to knowledge building in your first 3 months, and don't get frustrated. Like, that's the number one thing that I just said to another team that I was speaking with. Like, you're going to think that you found the golden path in enterprise. You're going to think that you had the champion, but you don't. Or they're going to leave the company, or they're going to reorg, and then you're going to have to pivot and rework an entire other infrastructure. So do not let that deter you. Just know that everything that you're building towards, if you're doing it in a very God, I always mess up this word, guys. Methodical way, you're going to be able to execute. The path will be provided because you've done all of the legwork to get there.
And I want to add one thing on that, Rona, because we talked about doing enterprise logos versus enterprise deals. And so when I'm hearing people saying, hey, we're just breaking into enterprise for the first time, we don't have a lot of examples of this, go treat those enterprise customers almost like a bunch of small startups. A lot of these enterprise customers have their own budgets within their own teams. You can go sell 1 or 2 or 3 seats or projects or whatever and build those stories and build that, within an account. Most of these accounts you're not going to be the vendor that comes in and sells a $3 million deal. It might take a couple of years going group by group and really building the value and understanding everything Rona's talking about, how they work and everything. But I think taking that mentality and treating some of those big, large enterprises as a bunch of separate companies, and I'm just going to go in and focus on this BU and sell them on the value and then go around the business, is a great strategy, which is what ZoomInfo did for many years. And we're finally getting to the place where we're doing more enterprise deals. And that is a great strategy too. So don't think you need to go get the whole account, in your first go, because it's probably not the way it's going to work out.
Yeah, unless you work for Workday or something that's really structural to the entire building and or company. They feel as ZoomInfo, even here at Orum, we're starting out with initial business units, and then we're expanding from there. And it's a whole nother motion in of itself, is how do you ask for those referrals to other portfolio companies that they acquired or to other business units. And you do need to treat, if you're a mid-market seller, I think it's such a great point, Tory. If you're selling those type of deals, those skills translate, and your account list might be smaller in terms of actual named of accounts, but you'll have a lot of sub opportunities or sub child accounts in your name. If let's say you're the IBM account owner, right, you're going to have Red Hat and Watson and all the other sub accounts and parent and business units as well. So.
And those are sales opportunities. And those can give you the proof point that later you take to the larger enterprise to be rolled out on a larger scale. So you don't know, that's the part that is always funny, the enterprise deal versus the enterprise space. You can have a $50K enterprise deal that then takes you to the multi-million enterprise, the actual much larger strategic one. But very few enterprise companies are going to have a few conversations with you and be like, okay, let me just sign away like multi-millions of my budget without having some sort of like historical proof point or like, I mean, I think the amount of time you are spent within that organization, however way you like, whatever it is that you actually sell them, that's going to be more of an and more of a reality than being able to just land a multi-million-dollar deal the first conversation.
I mean, Rona, to that point, they consider your first year purchase a pilot. It's a paid pilot, and that's consistent across any enterprise that we sold to over the years. It's like that first year, and then the second year you can ask for 2-year, 3-year. Plus. That's what you hear about on LinkedIn. We were talking about this in the pre-chat, like 5-year, $20 million TCV.
Oh God,
that was after a year of pilot, year of proof of value.
Yeah.
So, Colin, I wanted to ask you, because you brought up this, and this is the sort of the last topic I want to dig in with you guys, is messaging. And you talked about this idea of needing to scale like the messaging up and down the org. So regardless of what I'm selling, I need to talk about how it impacts the ICs and end users, their managers. I need to be able to speak to an executive and how it would impact them. How have you guys rolled that out at Orum? Like, what was that journey like for you guys? And hey, now we're trying to get a VP of sales and CRO that has, maybe hundreds or thousands of reps versus 20 reps, for example. What was that process like for you guys?
Look, I mean, we're a much smaller company than ZoomInfo. We're 150 some odd people here. So I'd say like enablement, is easier for us to scale out. And I'm a big believer that action brings information, and we try things and get feedback and see what resonates and what works. And from just talking to executives, first of all, researching the accounts. I mean, these public companies, everything's out there. You can go and research what they care about, what they're thinking about. These days you can use ChatGPT to look up industry trends, right? If you sell to one large publicly traded staffing company, what are the macro trends of that industry? And you can parlay that information, which was brought up before, with other large staff. They're all facing similar challenges, more or less. They might use different internal language to describe the challenge, and it's important that you modify your language there. And so I think you're really just training on business acumen. What are the different roles in a large organization? How do you spot people tied to initiatives based on those kind of new age titles? And it's not overly complex what we have done. I think just honestly and being transparent, I think a lot of trial and error, but hopefully we can help you accelerate the learning, today a bit.
Yeah. Trial and error. I think the willingness, because a lot of people are asking about this, like, where do I start if I haven't done it? It's the willingness to experiment. And like Rona, to your point earlier, sometimes you just pick up the phone and just start talking to people within the account to learn stuff. Just for the rest of you guys, what would you add in terms of being able to really understand how to align to a bigger business problem, a business priority? What tips do you have for reps and leaders that are learning how to do that maybe for the first time?
Yeah, I can jump in on this one. So when I was at Pave here, I'll share one other quick thing. So at times we would break down what we called our discovery trees. So we would start with a tactical situation, meaning companies were planning their compensation on spreadsheets. And then you turn that tactical situation, which is really a below the line complaint, and then you turn that into a problem. So for example, it takes a lot of time to plan compensation on spreadsheets. But the problem is that's still like a managerial, maybe a director level problem. The impact that actually ends up hitting the executive's plate is when your people are spending 1 million hours planning compensation in spreadsheets, they start making compensation mistakes. And compensation mistakes are a great way to get written up in Business Insider and have massive reputation issues and have employee retention issues. And so what you need to do is, Jason, you talk about chunking up, right? This is actually inverted. This would be chunking down, I guess. But you want to attach the tactical business problem of when your team is planning compensation on spreadsheets, it leads to these types of problems. But here's what that means for you as an executive. The at the line messaging usually happens here. The above the line messaging usually happens here. But you always need to attach the root cause to the tactical situation they're in, because otherwise you're just sending generic messaging that sounds like most companies don't like to have retention issues, and it doesn't actually make any tactical sense.
Yeah, I think one of the things, Armand, shout out to Armand's podcast. I've listened to it for a couple of years, but we sell sales specific software here. But I think in enterprise, one of the things that, to the mindset point, is your job is not just, I'm going to send emails and prospect, but it's really to understand the world in which you're selling into. And so, like for me, listening to sales podcasts, hearing what VPs of sales are talking about on these podcasts, on video calls, on earnings calls, whatever it is. Colin, you can read all the 10Ks you want, but I think if you sell in the HR space, go listen to HR podcasts. If you sell in the finance space, go listen to finance podcasts. Like, I think in order to do the exercise that Armand just did, you really have to understand CRO, what do they care about? And I guarantee it isn't, how much time their reps are spending in spreadsheets. They care about, how effective are we about going and selling upmarket if that's our goal or whatever the case may be. And so that is one piece of advice I would give anyone who's selling an enterprise is your job is 9 to 5, all of the things that move your deals. But from 5 to 9, it's really understanding the world in which you sell into, making sure not only you understand your customers, but also just like the overall market and world of whatever product or problem that you're selling and solving for.
Yeah, couldn't agree more there, Tory. Yeah, great point. Especially for large private companies, they're not going to have the 10Ks and all that, right? So you got to listen to the podcasts. And again, with AI today, you can get good summaries on what folks have been writing about, and I totally agree. And you can hear the way they speak about their business and the language. And that way, when you show up, you're speaking in their language, and do that method acting and become one of them. And soon enough, you'll see you've got an access card to their office, and they're inviting you in for lunch and learns, and you're treated like a member of the team, as was brought up before. A couple of books I just wanted to bring up that I think helped my team, and it wasn't all just trial and error. Like, there's a great book by an old Oracle rep called Hope is Not a Strategy. That was one that we've had our enterprise sellers read. And another popular one called The McKinsey Way. It was brought up earlier, like you're really a consultant. The McKinsey Way was written by a top McKinsey consultant, shows how they, approach questions and facilitation workshops. So highly recommend both those books for folks, diving in for the first time here.
One last tactical thing I would share for any sales leader or enablement leader on, one of my clients sells a cybersecurity solution, and they hire ex-CISOs to consult with them. So one of their consultants is literally the ex-CISO at Coca-Cola. So imagine having a resource like that you pay, $300, $400, $500 an hour to provide insight to your team. That's a really, really inexpensive way to learn a lot about what your personas care about. It's just like you can literally reach out to people direct and just ask them for consulting hours or look for consultants in that space. Cool. This wraps up the panel, portion of the show today. I was like looking at my notes there. This wraps up the panel portion. So Colin, Rona, Tory, appreciate having you guys on. Super killer.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, team.
Thank you.
You're stuck with me.
Everyone.
Oh, God, y'all are stuck with me and Jason. What are you going to do? Everyone's going to leave now, right? Folks, while we're here, drop your questions in the chat. We can talk about a lot of different things. We have a plan, but anything enterprise sales, let's talk.
Yeah, we'd love to answer as many questions as you can. So if you got them, drop them in the chat, drop them in the Q&A. We're going to spend the next 10, 12-ish minutes or so with Armand here. So is there anything specific for your situation? This is a guy that actually has done it before with Pave, and we're going to kind of dig into this a little bit. I wanted to talk to you about, like, you have these enterprise plays that we talked about in our last conversation. I think there are certain motions that you can execute on and plays that you can execute on that in mid-market, you kind of just like don't really need to.
Yeah.
And I feel like with enterprise, it can really help accelerate your ability to get a meeting with someone in the C-suite or at the VP level. How did you guys think of that at Pave? And feel free to give background on what you did at Pave too, if it helps.
Yeah. So folks, by background, and I don't have a hard stop. So if we need to riff a little bit more, if people have more questions, I'm happy to keep going. But I was employee number 9 at Pave, $100,000 of ARR. I left Pave when we were 13 million as their VP of sales, led the team from 0 to 50 people, went from selling $500 deals to $400,000 plus deals by the end of it. And so we were not ready to go enterprise, and we had to figure out how to get ready. And that included breaking into a lot of these customer accounts. And so there are two types of sales cycles you can run. I'll just riff on these. These are just through 30 MPC letters on them. And so the two motions is you have top-down yo-yo selling, which I mentioned earlier, which is when you start high, get introduction to the department leads, win across the department leads, come back, present your findings, and then figure out if it works with the technical goons once Mo or your VP of your chief people officer approves that this is aligned with the vision. A lot of people do the wrong thing and they actually get way caught in the weeds too early, but you want to start as high as possible, as early as possible. Usually this would happen in about 1 in 3 of our sales cycles. The way that you actually break into an account high is there are 4 different plays that we would like to run, where the first play was by far the most successful. So what we did is we were an early stage company and we looked at all of Andreessen Horowitz portfolio and we looked at all of YC Continuity's portfolio and all of Index Ventures portfolio. And we took the top 50 most successful startups from all of those investors and we put them into a spreadsheet. And we were like, yo, you led our Series A, you led our Series B, we led our Series C. I want you guys to go and make introductions to all of the chief people officers at these top 50 enterprise SaaS companies. And I had our CEO make the ask. So literally from our investors alone, we got something like 40 meetings with enterprise customers at the top. And those folks were way more friendly. If we couldn't get introductions from the investors, we would have our CEO send a note. And then if we couldn't have a CEO send a note, and we also didn't have customer referrals, by the way, then we would go into AE prospecting and SDR prospecting. But to me, this is like the hard ground that you have to like crack into when there's so much opportunity to have people above the line to do some of the work for you.
So this is such a killer approach. Let us know in the chat if this is something that you can do at your company. Because I'm thinking a lot of the folks here, they might be in a sales org that's got less than 20 or 25 reps, and they're selling against competitors that are just huge. What you all have here is likely an investor backing your company and being able to work through those investors and get those introductions. And if I'm understanding this correctly, you're essentially ghostwriting these messages for your exec and stuff to send out.
Correct. So here's an example CXO to CXO note that happened mid-sales cycle. So we're asking about messaging tips. You can do this stuff as an SDR. I have my SDRs do this stuff all the time. Just because you wrote the message doesn't mean that you need to send the message. So best way to multi-thread is actually when you're mid-sales cycle. I love to send what's called a benign CXO to CXO note. So let's say that I had a first call with a champion. I'm an account executive. And I don't get the sense that I'm going to get in front of power for a while. I'm going to go to my CEO or have my SDR go to my CEO and be like, hey, we're here with this champion, this director of demand gen. I want you to send a CXO to CXO note to the CMO, right? And it'll usually say something like, hey, Nick on my team has been working with John on your side. He's been absolutely phenomenal. I'm the CEO of 30 Minutes to President's Club, and I personally wanted to extend my support. We're fans of you all, and we'd be thrilled to partner with you all. Would you be open to connecting for 15 minutes this week? By the way, this is an actual sponsor. This was an email that I sent to Say, who's the CMO over at, or VP of Marketing over at Superhuman, and this is what got us to power and close the deal. And so you can do things like this as well.
Love this executive to executive outreach.
You're welcome to screenshot this if you'd like.
So Emily Rose got a question. So she's in account management. She said, our team has recently pivoted to an upmarket motion, but there's no process in place yet. Where do I start? How do I prepare myself for this process shift with no process in place? And I think the important context there is it sounds like these are existing customers and it's more of an upsell or cross-sell, type of motion.
Yeah. Recently pivoted to an upmarket motion, but there's no process in place. It looked like from the question, it might be net new, actually, because I didn't see anything about the existing, because it says pivoted to an upmarket motion. I think they were just, it is cross-sell. Okay. This is fun. So cross-selling can oftentimes mean you're selling different products into the same customer, right? And that means that you're probably selling different products into the same customer at big accounts. And so this goes back to what we were talking about on the panel with Colin, is sometimes what that means is you need to have an initial product land that can help, one, demonstrate some early value, and then two, shed light on other problems that you would want to solve. So for example, one of the things that we would do at Pave when we were first constructing this motion, we would always try to design like what was the easiest way for us to like get a customer to do one cycle with us, or like how could we get a customer in the car for one compensation cycle. We wanted to be able to help them run their compensation cycles, and that was a massive pain that would like hit the vein hard twice a year. But then all year round, we wanted them to roll out total reward statements for all of their employees, which is sort of like a nice to have. It's like a thing that adds up the value of your salary compensation and has confetti drop down whenever you get a raise, right? That's the non-sales version of it. And so what we would do is we would be comfortable, even though our CEO didn't love it. Sometimes we would sell these compensation planner deals for like one cycle to land them without the reward statements, and we would have a lower price. And then what we would do is the moment they would actually roll out the raises, we would come back to them with pre-drafted portals because they were already onboarded onto our product. And we would say like, look, you're literally like a click away from being able to roll these out to your team. Can we talk to some of the other executives around what this might mean for your organization? And so that's a little bit about how like we approach the land and expand motion. But if there are more specific questions, I'm happy to dive in.
Love that. I'm assuming a part of that too was, do you plant the seed for the land and expand like before closing the pilot? Is that part of like the success criteria? Is that, hey, how does this need to go? We would love to roll this out to the rest of like the team. What needs to happen in order for us to make that happen, et cetera? Is it part of the criteria for the POC?
Yeah. And so earlier in the sales cycle, they will have seen most of the product. They will have seen other parts of the product. And oftentimes you'll get resistance on people won't want to take too much on at once. And then what we'll say is like, awesome, let's like make the exit criteria for this pilot. Like, let's just like run a cycle successfully. Yeah. So there's the exit criteria, but then there's the exit action. Yeah. So the exit action is you obviously convert to a full customer. And then we can agree that if we do this well for this one, let's talk about for your next one. So if the first cycle was in spring, the next one's going to be in fall, then let's start planning for what it would look like to do an off-cycle rollout between spring and fall of these comp statements, now that everyone is happy and they have raises.
Love it. What do? You sort of answered this question earlier, but someone dropped into the Q&A. What happens when you're an early startup and you don't have any success stories?
Yeah.
So you were able to get some of those introductions before, but like, what did you do for customer stories? Or if people asked you, who else have you worked with and you haven't worked with an enterprise logo yet? Like, yeah, or done an enterprise deal. How did you handle that?
Yeah. So this sounds sort of bad, but when it's that early, oftentimes you avoid it. Right. Yeah. And you don't proactively just start saying like, yeah, you're going to be the biggest customer we've ever signed. Like, that's probably a horrible idea to success. Yeah. And so oftentimes you would be surprised with like a really tight sales motion, a really tight security process, a really tight IT process when you're doing team selling, when you're selling with sales engineers, your engineering team, at times your CEO, you can come off bigger than you actually seem by selling as a team. So that's number one. But then number two is, in addition to like having SOC 2 and like having your vendor review buttons like all put away. But then number two, people don't necessarily need a big comparable. They need a similarly stringent comparable. And so, for example, oftentimes when we were at Carta, people would be taking a lot of inspiration from, we had like a lot of like whatever feet biters or ankle biting competitors. And sometimes our ankle biting competitors would like run a marketing campaign that was super, super successful. And our CRO would get lit up about it. And they'd be like, we need to go figure out who they're working with because they're actually crushing us on this top of funnel. And so oftentimes, if we did not have a company of a similar size, we at least had a company in a similar space or in a similar geography or in a similar type of situation who was frankly doing a better job of whatever problem they were trying to solve in their situation. It might be a slightly smaller scale. It might be going from 1,500 to 500 employees, but I can still draw some of the parallels to that.
Yeah, love that. We got time for one more question. Andrew Young works at Pave, it looks like, started in January, working on some upmarket stuff as an SDR. Its biggest issue is getting content and messaging in front of these prospects. Oftentimes it feels like I'm sending things into an abyss, similar to some of the other questions. How are you getting engagement on cold outreach at some of these huge enterprises?
Oh, look at that. Welcome. Awesome team you got over there. So what I would do is, so it's definitely going to feel like you're sending messages into an abyss if you are doing the same high volume outreach that's like that traditional mid-market motion. We used to make Matt, our CEO, send what were called emotional looms. If you mention the word emo loom to any of the OGs on that team, like Cole, they'll know exactly what you're talking about. What I would do is I would put together a list of your top 10 enterprise accounts and be like, this is the person I want you to send a loom to. This is the problem that I think they have. This is why I think they're a great customer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And can I get your help? Like putting together one of these videos and like have your CEO send those videos. That's number one. Number two is Pave is fortunate enough, and I can't speak to other folks in the audience, but Pave is not the biggest company in the world, but we are fortunate enough to have a lot of other customers in the enterprise space now. And the first thing that I would do when I was picking up an account is I would like plop into the CPO field and I would go secondary degree connections. And I would just go down the list of like, who are all of the other chief people officers and VPs of people that they know in their network? And are any of those customer names the same as ours? And if they are, go bug your CS team and see if you can get an introduction from a happy customer to another customer. That's another way. I know I'm not giving you a ton of specific messaging answers, but my final answer for your specific prospecting is you've got to do the chunking up stuff. If you're sending the same messaging we were sending on people get tired of clicks and merit cycles and spreadsheets and all that stuff to a CPO, it's not going to land with the chief people officer of NVIDIA.
And getting those meetings, like we talked about at the beginning with Rona, like, ground swelling essentially.
100%.
How are we getting meetings with folks in the company just to get intel? Because those are folks that, an HR person or, payroll person is going to be a lot easier to get a hold of than their C-suite counterpart. Armand, we're out of time, dude. Go check out Armand's book. Where can people go check that out again?
Y'all are the best. So this one is, I know we talked mostly general like referral strategy and all that stuff, but one of the best ways to actually get in front of these folks is to pick up the phone. And so we wrote a step-by-step guide on calling strangers called Cold Calling Sucks, and that's why it works. And has talk tracks, QR codes, a million different ways that you can handle any in the world. If you go to 30mpc.com/book, you can pre-order it now, or next week it goes live on Amazon and you can get it audio, digital, wherever you want. So that's all.
Cool. Always good jamming, man. Thanks for coming on. Thank you, everyone.
All right,
Have a good rest of your week. We will see you.